Marcus had always believed that success was measured in square footage and bank statements. At 42, he owned a penthouse overlooking the glittering city skyline, drove a car worth more than most people's homes, and wore suits that cost more than many monthly salaries. Yet as he stood on his marble balcony each evening, surrounded by the warm glow of luxury, he felt colder than the winter wind that swept through the urban canyons below. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had everything money could buy, but he couldn't purchase the one thing his soul craved most: genuine human connection. His days blended into a monotonous rhythm of board meetings, conference calls, and corporate dinners where conversations never ventured beyond profit margins and market projections. His weekends were spent alone in his pristine apartment, the silence so profound it seemed to echo off the designer furniture and imported artwork that decorated his carefully curated life. Marcus had built walls higher than his penthouse, constructed from years of betrayal in business-failed relationships where people loved his wallet more than his heart, and the gradual erosion of trust that comes from living in a world where everything has a price tag. He had convinced himself that solitude was strength, that independence was immunity from disappointment. But the human heart wasn't designed for such isolation. One particularly brutal December evening, as snow began to blanket the city in pristine white, Marcus found himself walking the streets instead of retreating to his golden cage. The cold bit through his expensive overcoat, but somehow the physical discomfort felt more honest than the emotional numbness he'd been carrying for years. That's when he saw her. Elena sat hunched on a worn blanket outside the subway entrance, her weathered hands wrapped around a steaming cup that looked like it had been refilled with hot water more times than coffee. Her clothes were layers of different textures and colors, clearly assembled from whatever warmth could be found rather than fashion. But it was her eyes that stopped Marcus in his tracks. They held a depth of wisdom and kindness that no amount of money could buy. A small cardboard sign beside her read, "Not asking for money, just hoping someone might share a story or a smile." Marcus had walked past countless people in similar situations, his gaze always fixed ahead, his pace never slowing. But something about Elena's request touched a part of him he thought had died long ago. She wasn't asking for his wealth. She was asking for his humanity. He found himself kneeling beside her before he could talk himself out of it. "I'm Marcus," he said simply, his voice barely audible above the city's constant hum. Her face lit up like sunrise, breaking through storm clouds. "Elena. And what a beautiful name Marcus is. It means warlike. But you don't look like someone who's fighting anyone but himself." The accuracy of her observation hit him like a physical blow. Here was a woman who had nothing, yet she could see through his armor with gentle precision. "Tell me something true about yourself," Elena continued, patting the ground beside her blanket in invitation. Marcus hesitated. When was the last time someone had asked him that? When was the last time he'd been asked anything that mattered beyond his net worth or business strategy? "I'm the loneliest successful person I know," he admitted, the words tumbling out before his usual defenses could stop them. Elena nodded, as if this was the most natural confession in the world. "Success is like expensive perfume," she said, taking a careful sip from her cup. "A little bit can make you feel wonderful, but too much can suffocate everyone around you, including yourself." They talked for 3 hours that night. Elena shared stories of the people she'd met on the streets, not tales of desperation, but stories of resilience, love, and the incredible kindness that strangers showed each other when they thought no one was watching. Marcus found himself sharing memories he'd buried beneath years of corporate armor. His childhood dreams of becoming a teacher, his love for painting that he'd abandoned for profit, his deep fear that he'd traded his soul for success. When Marcus finally stood to leave, he pressed a business card into Elena's hand, not to offer her charity, but because he wanted to see her again. She looked at the embossed gold lettering and expensive cardstock, then handed it back with a smile. "Keep your card, Marcus, but if you want to find me, I'll be here tomorrow evening." And the evening after that. some of the most important appointments in life don't need fancy invitations. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. For the first time in years, it wasn't because of anxiety about quarterly reports or market volatility. It was because he felt something stirring in his chest that he'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. The next evening, he returned. And the evening after that, each night, their conversations went deeper. Elena became his teacher in the art of being human. She showed him how to notice the small miracles that happened on every street corner. The businessman who bought coffee for the person behind him, the teenager who helped an elderly woman with her groceries. The way strangers' faces softened when someone took the time to really see them. Kindness isn't about grand gestures, Elena told him one evening, as they watched people hurry past in their own private worlds. It's about paying attention. Most people are drowning in loneliness, but they're too proud or too scared to admit it. When you really see someone, when you acknowledge their worth just by paying attention, you throw them a lifeline they didn't even know they needed. Marcus began to understand that his wealth wasn't his prison. His inability to connect authentically was. Money had never been the problem. His fear of vulnerability was. Inspired by Elena's wisdom, Marcus began small experiments in kindness. He started learning his doorman's name and asking about his family. He began having real conversations with his assistant instead of just barking orders. He started a program at his company where employees could share personal wins and challenges, not just professional ones. But the most profound change came when Marcus realized that Elena had been giving him the greatest gift imaginable. She had been kind to him when he needed it most, without expecting anything in return. She had seen through his expensive armor to the lonely heart beneath and had chosen compassion over judgment. One evening, 6 months after their first meeting, Marcus arrived at their usual spot to find Elena wasn't there. Panic seized his chest. He asked other people on the street if they'd seen her, but no one had information. For 3 days he returned, hoping she would appear. On the 4th day, he found a note tucked under a small stone where her blanket usually lay. Dear Marcus, watching you rediscover your heart has been the greatest privilege of my life. You don't need me anymore. You've remembered how to see the world with kindness. That was always inside you. I just helped you dust it off. Go share your light with others who are still lost in the dark. Love, Elena. P.S. Check the Children's Hospital on 5th Street. They could use a volunteer art teacher. Marcus never saw Elena again. But her impact rippled through his life like golden threads weaving through dark fabric. He discovered she had been right about the Children's Hospital. They desperately needed volunteers. He started teaching art classes every weekend, watching sick children create masterpieces with more joy than he'd felt closing million-dollar deals. The loneliness that had haunted him for years began to dissolve. Not because he'd found someone to fill the emptiness, but because he'd learned to reach out and fill the emptiness in others. He realized that the antidote to loneliness wasn't being love, was choosing to love. To pay attention, to show up with genuine kindness, even when it was inconvenient or uncomfortable. Marcus still lived in his penthouse, still wore expensive suits, still closed important deals. But now his success had a different quality. His boardroom presence was tempered with humanity. His wealth became a tool for connection rather than isolation. His home became a gathering place for friends who valued his heart as much as his bank account. Years later, Marcus would tell people that the richest man he'd ever met was a homeless woman who taught him that kindness is the only currency that matters. Elena had shown him that true wealth isn't measured in what you accumulate, but in what you give away. Your attention, your compassion, your willingness to see the divine spark in every person you meet. The golden thread of kindness that Elena had woven into his life became a tapestry that connected him to his community, his purpose, and his own humanity. Marcus learned that loneliness ends not when someone chooses to love you, but when you choose to love someone else. In reaching out to help Elena, Marcus had saved himself. In teaching him about kindness, Elena had given him the key to a life worth living. Sometimes the most glamorous transformation isn't about gaining something new. It's about rediscovering something precious you thought you'd lost forever. The story combines universal themes of hope, community, and human connection that resonate across all demographics. Like and subscribe Kindness Records for more kindness videos.